At my granddaughter's wedding, they handed me a name tag that read, "The absent old lady." Not grandmother. Not family. Just absent. Funny thing is, I had paid for nearly everything in that room. The venue, the dress, even the champagne they were drinking. So I smiled, pinned it to my chest, and decided if they wanted me to be absent, I would give them exactly that. My name is Margaret Holloway. I am 72 years old, a widow, and until recently, I believed I understood my place in my family. I was wrong. If you're here with me now, stay until the end. Stories like this have a way of revealing truths we don't always want to see. The morning of my granddaughter Chloe's wedding began quietly. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows of my bedroom, resting gently across the polished wooden floor. For a moment, I simply sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded in my lap, listening to the stillness of the house. It used to be noisier. Years ago, mornings like this meant rushing, laughter, voices calling from different rooms. My husband, Edward, would already be downstairs making coffee. Always too strong, always slightly burnt, but somehow perfect because he made it. Now, the house only echoed. I stood slowly, smoothing the fabric of my robe, and walked toward the closet. I had chosen my dress weeks earlier, a soft silver blue gown, simple but elegant. Edward used to say that color made me look like the sky just before evening. I hadn't worn it since he passed, but today felt important. Not because of the wedding itself, though Chloe had spared no expense making it extravagant. No, what mattered to me was something quieter, something older. Family. I had spent most of my life believing that if you gave enough, your time, your love, your sacrifices, family would always remember, that they would always see you. I slipped into the dress carefully, fastening the small row of buttons along the back. My fingers moved slower than they used to, but I took my time. Important days deserve patience. On the vanity sat a small velvet box. Inside was a pearl necklace Edward had given me on our 30th anniversary. I lifted it gently, fastening it around my neck, feeling the familiar coolness against my skin. "All right, Margaret," I murmured softly to my reflection. "Let's not be late." The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier. Thick ivory paper, gold lettering, expensive, tasteful, impersonal. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennet request the honor of your presence." No handwritten note.
No grammar. No quorums.
I remember turning the card over in my hands, searching for something, anything, that felt like it was meant for me. There was nothing. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. Weddings are busy. People forget small things. That's what I believed. What I chose to believe. By the time I stepped outside, the driver was already waiting. The venue was nearly an hour away, a luxury estate just outside the city, the kind of place people choose when they want their happiness to look expensive. As the car pulled away from the house, I watched the familiar streets pass by slowly. Every corner held a memory. Chloe as a little girl, running through my garden with dirt on her shoes. Her laughter when I baked her favorite apple pie. The way she used to hug me tightly and say, "Grandma, you're my favorite person." Children grow. That's what everyone says. They grow and life changes and priorities shift. That's natural. What no one tells you is how quietly you can disappear from that process. When we arrived, the estate was already glowing with activity. White flowers lined the entrance. Crystal lights hung from tall trees like falling stars. Guests in elegant attire moved across the grounds, their laughter blending with the soft music drifting through the air. It was beautiful, truly. And as I stepped out of the car, adjusting my dress, I felt something warm rise in my chest.
Pride.
Because I had helped make this possible. Not for recognition, never for that, but because I loved her, because she was my granddaughter, and I believed that meant something. The moment I stepped onto the stone pathway leading into the estate, something felt off. Not wrong in an obvious way, just slightly misaligned, like a painting hung a few inches too low. A young woman in a black uniform stood near the entrance, holding a tablet. She smiled politely as guests approached, checking names and directing them inside with practiced ease. Welcome, she said to the couple ahead of me. Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, this way, please. They were greeted warmly, escorted.
Scene.
When it was my turn, I offered a small smile. Margaret Holloway, I said. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, then paused. For a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but I saw it. That hesitation. Yes, she said, though her tone had shifted ever so slightly. One moment, please. She tapped again, scrolling, her expression tightening just enough to make my chest feel strangely hollow. I'm sorry, she added, lowering her voice. Your name isn't listed in the main guest registry. I blinked. That's not possible, I replied gently. I'm the bride's grandmother. The words sounded strange as soon as I said them, not because they weren't true, but because of how they felt unnecessary, as if I had to justify my place. The young woman nodded quickly, clearly uncomfortable. Of course, ma'am. Let me just check the secondary list. Secondary list. I stood there quietly while she searched again. Around me, more guests arrived. Laughter, greetings, the soft clink of champagne glasses already being passed near the entrance. No one looked at me. No one noticed. After a moment, she brightened slightly. Yes, here you are. Relief flickered across her face, more than mine. You're on the auxiliary list. Auxiliary. Such a careful word. Such a distant one. She handed me a small envelope and gestured toward a table set off to the side. Please collect your name tag there. Not escorted. Not welcomed. Just directed. I nodded politely and moved toward the table. Each step felt slower than the last. The table was neatly arranged with rows of printed name cards, each paired with a small gold pin. I glanced down as I approached. Parents of the bride. Family. Close friends. Each title carefully chosen. Each one meaningful. My fingers hovered for a moment before finding my name. Margaret Holloway. Printed clearly.
No mistake.
But beneath it, there was no title. Just my name. Alone. I picked it up slowly, turning it over between my fingers. The paper was thick, expensive. Everything about this wedding had been designed with care. Every detail considered. Except this one. I looked up instinctively, scanning the crowd. Guests were being greeted with warm embraces. Laughter echoed across the garden. Somewhere in the distance, I caught a glimpse of Chloe, radiant in white, surrounded by bridesmaids, glowing under the soft afternoon light. She looked happy, truly happy. And for a moment I told myself that was enough. That maybe I was overthinking things. That maybe this, whatever this was, didn't mean anything at all. But then something else caught my attention. A man walked past me, adjusting his jacket, laughing with someone beside him. Pinned neatly to his chest was a card that read, Family, groom's side.
Clear.
Defined. Recognized. I lower my eyes to my own card again. Just a name. No place. No role. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just absence. Like standing in a room where you know you belong, but somehow no one else agrees. I reached for one of the small gold pins on the table, held it between my fingers, and for a brief moment I hesitated, because something deep inside me, something quiet but certain, whispered a question I wasn't ready to answer. When did I stop being part of this family and start becoming a guest? I pinned the name tag to my dress, carefully, as if handling something fragile might somehow change what it meant. It didn't. The reception area opened into a wide garden filled with soft music and polished laughter. Everything shimmered. Crystal glasses caught the sunlight. White roses lined the pathways. Waiters moved gracefully between guests, carrying trays of champagne that sparkled like liquid gold. It was the kind of setting people dreamed about. Perfect. Effortless. Expensive. And for a moment I allowed myself to simply stand there and take it in, because despite everything, I was still proud. Proud of Chloe. Proud that she was starting her life in a place like this, even if I didn't quite understand where I fit into it anymore. I stepped further into the crowd, adjusting the light shawl over my shoulders. No one stopped me. No one greeted me, which I told myself was normal. There were many guests. People were busy. Weddings are chaotic. Still, something felt different. Not the kind of busy where people are distracted. The kind where they simply don't notice you at all. A group of women stood nearby, laughing over glasses of champagne. I recognized one of them, an old family friend who had attended several of our holiday dinners years ago. "Linda," I said gently as I approached. She turned, her smile bright at first, then faltered slightly. "Oh, Margaret," she said.
Not warm.
"Not cold. Just surprised. I didn't know you'd be here." The words landed softly, but they landed. "I'm Chloe's grandmother," I replied with a small smile, as if that needed explaining. "Yes, of course," she said quickly, recovering. "I just haven't seen you at the recent events." Recent events? Engagement parties, bridal showers, rehearsal dinners. I had received invitations to none of them. "I suppose I've been busy," I said. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. She nodded, already turning her attention back to the others. The conversation moved on without me. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, then quietly stepped away. Near the center of the garden, I spotted Chloe. She stood surrounded by photographers and bridesmaids, her white gown catching the light with every movement. She looked radiant, exactly as a bride should. For a brief second, I saw her the way I used to, a little girl in my kitchen, flour on her cheeks, laughing as she tried to roll dough with hands too small to manage it. "Grandma, look," she used to say, always wanting me to see, always wanting my approval. I took a step toward her, then another, but before I could reach her, someone else stepped in front of me, a tall man in a dark suit, holding a clipboard. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely. "Immediate family photos are about to begin. This area is restricted." Restricted. I glanced past him, toward Chloe. She hadn't seen me. Or perhaps she hadn't looked. "I am family," I said quietly. He hesitated, his eyes flicking briefly to the name tag on my chest. That was all it took. "I understand," he replied, still polite. "But only those listed for the main family group are allowed in this section." Main family group. The phrase echoed in my mind. I could have insisted. I could have raised my voice. I could have called Chloe's name. But I didn't. Because something inside me had already begun to understand what the words on that small card truly meant. I stepped back. "Of course," I said softly. The man nodded, already turning away. And just like that, I was outside the frame, not just of the photograph, but of something much larger. I moved toward the edge of the garden, where the noise softened and the laughter became distant. From there, I watched Chloe smile for the cameras, watched Vanessa adjust her dress, positioning herself perfectly at the center of each shot, watched my family continue without me. The name tag felt heavier than it should have. A small piece of paper, a simple label, and yet, it had somehow managed to say everything no one else would. I lowered my eyes to it again, and for the first time, I didn't feel confused. I felt certain. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. And whatever place I thought I still had in this family, it no longer existed. I stayed near the edge of the garden for a while, long enough for the music to change, long enough for the sunlight to soften into that golden shade photographers love, long enough to realize that no one was looking for me. Eventually, a waiter approached with a tray of champagne. "Would you like one, ma'am?" His voice was warm, neutral, professional. I smiled and took a glass. "Thank you." It was a small kindness, and strangely, it was the only one I had received since arriving. I took a slow sip and let my eyes wander again across the reception. Every detail was flawless. The floral arrangements alone must have cost more than most people spend on a car. The string quartet played softly beneath a canopy of lights. Guests laughed easily, moving from one conversation to another as if everything in the world was exactly as it should be. And perhaps for them it was Margaret. The voice came from behind me. I turned. Vanessa. My daughter-in-law stood there in a perfectly tailored dress, her posture as composed as ever. Not a single strand of hair out of place. Not a single emotion out of line. She smiled. but it didn't reach her eyes. "I see you made it," she said. "Made it." As if I had been uncertain. As if I had not belonged here to begin with. "Yes," I replied calmly. "Of course." Her gaze flickered briefly to my chest, to the name tag. Something unreadable passed across her face. Approval, perhaps, or confirmation. "I hope everything is to your liking," she continued, gesturing lightly toward the reception. "It's beautiful," I said truthfully.
It was.
That wasn't the problem. There was a brief pause. The kind that exists when something real could be said but won't be. "I didn't see you at the rehearsal dinner," she added. "I wasn't invited." I said it gently, without accusation, without edge.
Just a fact.
Vanessa tilted her head slightly, as if considering how to respond. "Oh," she said after a moment. "It was a very small gathering. Mostly immediate family." Immediate family. Again, that phrase. So carefully used. So deliberately placed. I held her gaze. "Of course," I repeated. Because what else was there to say? Her attention shifted almost immediately. A group of guests nearby caught her eye, important ones, judging by the way her expression sharpened into something more polished, more performative. "Well," she said, smoothing an invisible crease in her dress, "enjoy the evening." And just like that, she was gone. I stood there, the echo of her words settling quietly inside me. Immediate family. Not forgotten. Not overlooked.
Defined.
A few minutes later, a young staff member approached the table near me, the same one where the name tags had been arranged earlier. She carried a small stack of additional cards. Adjustments, perhaps. Corrections. I watched absent-mindedly as she placed them down, straightening the rows with careful precision. Then one card slipped slightly from the pile. Just enough for me to see. I stepped closer.
Slowly.
Without quite knowing why. And there it was. My name again. Margaret Holloway. But this time, there was something printed beneath it. A title.
Clear.
Deliberate. Impossible to misunderstand. The Absent Old Lady. For a moment, the world didn't stop. The music continued. Laughter carried on. Glasses clinked somewhere in the distance. Everything moved exactly as it had before. Except me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply stared at the words, reading them once, then again, as if they might change, as if I had misunderstood. Absent.
Old.
Lady. Not grandmother. Not family. Not even a name with dignity. Just a description. A dismissal. A quiet realization settled over me then. Not sharp. Not explosive. But steady.
Certain.
This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't someone else's oversight. This was how they saw me, how they had chosen to present me, to everyone. I reached out slowly and picked up the card, held it between my fingers, felt the weight of it. So light, and yet, heavier than anything I had carried in years. Then, very carefully, I smiled. I stood there for a long moment, holding that card between my fingers. The Absent Old Lady. The words didn't blur. They didn't soften. If anything, they became sharper the longer I looked at them. Behind me, laughter rose and fell like waves. Someone called for more champagne. A group of guests clapped as the music shifted into something more lively. Life continued, as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had been revealed. I exhaled slowly. Then, very carefully, I placed the card back onto the table. Not hidden, not removed, exactly where it had been. Because suddenly I understood something very clearly. This wasn't meant for me. This was meant to be seen. I reached up and touched the name tag already pinned to my dress. Just my name.
Plain.
Harmless.
Safe.
A quieter version of the truth. How interesting. They had prepared two identities for me. One acceptable. One honest. I let my hand fall back to my side. And then, without hurry, I picked up my glass of champagne and walked back into the crowd. This time, I paid closer attention.
Not to what people said, but to how they looked at me.
Or rather, how they didn't. 2 men stood near the bar discussing business. As I passed, one of them glanced briefly at me, his eyes flicking to my name tag, then away again, uninterested.
No recognition. No curiosity.
Nothing. A young woman brushed past me, laughing, her perfume lingering in the air. Sorry, she said automatically, without slowing down, without looking.
To her, I was just space.
Something to move around. I stopped near a table where a small group was gathered. One of them, a middle-aged man with a warm smile, looked at me for a moment longer than the others. Good evening, he said politely. Good evening, I replied. A pause followed, just long enough for a question that never came. And you are? He didn't ask, because whatever he saw when he looked at me didn't require knowing. I smiled faintly and moved on. Near the far side of the garden, I noticed something else. A large decorative board, elegantly framed, displaying the wedding contributors. Names written in gold script. Highlighted. Celebrated. I stepped closer. Read them one by one. Vanessa Bennett. Richard Bennett. Corporate sponsors. Family friends. Even distant relatives. My name wasn't there. Not even a mention. Not even a quiet acknowledgement. For a brief moment, something stirred in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Something older. Memory. Late nights reviewing invoices. Phone calls arranging vendors. A check signed for the venue deposit. Another for the dress. Another and another. All done quietly. All done without asking for recognition. Because love, in my generation, was not something you announced. It was something you gave. I looked at the board again. Then around the room. At the lights. The flowers. The music. And I realized something that settled deep into my bones. This entire evening was built on my absence. Not just physically, but intentionally, carefully, deliberately. I wasn't forgotten. I had been removed. And yet, they had still taken everything I gave. A strange calm washed over me then, the kind that doesn't come from peace, but from clarity. I lifted my glass slightly, watching the bubbles rise to the surface. So delicate, so temporary. Then I took a small sip, and for the first time since arriving, I stopped waiting for someone to notice me. Because now I understood. They already had. Just not in the way I once believed. I don't remember exactly when I moved away from the crowd, only that at some point, the music grew quieter, the laughter more distant, and I found myself standing near the far edge of the estate, where the garden met a line of old oak trees. It was cooler there, quieter, more honest. I set my glass down on a small table and rested my hands lightly against its edge. For a moment, I simply stood still, breathing, listening, remembering. Because once you stop trying to belong, memories have a way of finding you. I saw Chloe again. Not the bride standing under crystal lights, but the child she used to be. 5 years old, barefoot in my kitchen. "Grandma, can I help?" she would ask, already climbing onto a chair before I answered. Flour on her cheeks, sugar on her fingers, laughing when she made a mess of everything. "You're not doing it right," I used to tease. And she would grin. "Then you show me." I closed my eyes briefly. That little girl had loved me without hesitation, without condition, without calculation. When did that change? My thoughts shifted further back, to the day Vanessa first entered our family. Perfect smile, perfect posture, perfect words. "I just want Chloe to have the best life possible," she had said. And I believed her. I truly did. Because what mother wouldn't want that for her child? At first, the changes were small, subtle, easy to overlook. Family dinners became less frequent. Then they moved to Vanessa's house. Then I stopped being asked what dishes to bring. Then I stopped being asked at all. "Things are just busy," Chloe would say. "Mom's handling everything now." Handling everything. I had nodded, smiled, stepped back. Because that's what you do when you think your role is simply evolving. not disappearing. I opened my eyes again, staring out toward the glowing reception in the distance. It looked like something from a dream, or perhaps a performance. The wedding. I remembered the first conversation. Vanessa sitting across from me at my dining table, her voice calm, measured. "We want something elegant," she said. "Something unforgettable." Chloe had looked at me then, hopeful, excited. "Of course," I had replied, without hesitation. And from that moment on, I gave. The venue, paid in full. The dress,
Custom made.
the flowers, imported. Even the honeymoon, a surprise I had arranged quietly, thinking it would make her smile. I never asked for my name to be mentioned, never asked for a seat at the center, never asked for recognition. Because love, to me, had never been a transaction. It was something you gave freely, something you trusted would be understood, without needing to be explained. I let out a slow breath. How strange that everything I had given had been accepted so easily. And yet, I had not been. A soft breeze moved through the trees, brushing lightly against my face.
Cool.
Grounding. Real. Behind me, the music swelled again. Voices rose. Glasses clinked. The celebration continued. Perfectly.
Seamlessly.
As if I had never been part of it. I lowered my gaze to my hands.
Steady. Calm. No anger. No tears.
Just clarity. Because standing there, in the quiet, I finally understood something I should have seen long ago. This wasn't about a name tag. It wasn't about a seat, or a title, or even respect. It was about something far simpler. I had spent years giving them everything. And in return, they had slowly, carefully, given me nothing back. Not even a place to stand. A voice broke through the quiet behind me.
Soft.
Careful, but unmistakably familiar. "Margaret, I was wondering if you'd come." I turned slowly. It was Elaine Carter, an old friend, not family, but close enough to remember what that word used to mean. She approached with a hesitant smile, her eyes searching my face as if trying to understand something she couldn't quite name. "I almost didn't recognize you standing out here alone," she said gently. "I wasn't sure if you were avoiding the crowd." "Something like that," I replied. She followed my gaze toward the reception. The lights, the music, the carefully arranged happiness. "It's quite a wedding," she said after a moment. "Yes," I answered. "It is." Another pause, but this one felt different, heavier. Elaine shifted slightly, lowering her voice. "I saw the board," she said quietly. "The contributors."
I didn't respond.
I didn't need to. Her lips pressed together, as if she were deciding whether to continue. Then, I also saw something else. That made me look at her. "There was a conversation," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Near the terrace. I don't think they realized anyone could hear." I didn't ask who. I already knew. Elaine's eyes softened. "I wasn't going to say anything," she continued, "but you deserve to know." The breeze moved gently between us, carrying distant laughter, carrying everything that no longer belonged to me. "What did they say?" I asked. My voice was calm, steady. Elaine hesitated, just for a second. Then she spoke. "It was Vanessa and Chloe." "Of course." "They were talking about the guest list," she said, "and about you."
I felt something shift inside my chest. Not pain.
Not shock. Just confirmation. Elaine swallowed lightly. Vanessa said. She paused, as if the words themselves were difficult to repeat. She said, "It's better this way." She wouldn't understand the kind of people we're dealing with now. A small silence settled between us. "And Chloe?" I asked. Elaine looked at me carefully, as if weighing whether I truly wanted to hear the rest. But I held her gaze. She didn't argue. Elaine said softly. She just laughed a little. That was all. No defense.
No hesitation. No correction.
Just acceptance. The sound of distant music filled the space where her words ended. I nodded once.
Slowly.
I see, I said. Elaine stepped closer. Margaret, I'm so sorry. I turned back toward the reception, toward the lights, toward the life that had quietly moved on without me. You know, I said after a moment, almost thoughtfully, for a long time, I thought I was being included. Elaine said nothing. I thought stepping back was kindness, I continued, that letting them take the lead meant they still valued me. A faint smile touched my lips. Not bitter, not sad, just aware. But now I understand, I said. The music swelled again in the distance. Applause followed. Another perfect moment unfolding without me. I wasn't stepping back. I finished quietly. I was being replaced. Elaine reached out, gently touching my arm. You're not replaceable. I looked down at her hand, then back at the reception. No, I said softly. You're right. A pause. I'm not. And for the first time that evening, there was something different in my voice. Not hurt, not confusion. Something steadier, something sharper. Something that had been waiting, patiently, for the truth to arrive. I stood there a moment longer after Elaine walked away. The breeze had settled. The music continued. And somewhere in the distance, someone laughed. Light, effortless, untouched by anything real. I should have felt something stronger. Anger, humiliation, maybe even grief. But I didn't. What I felt instead was stillness. The kind that comes when a question you've carried for years is finally answered. I picked up my glass again. The champagne had gone slightly flat. I didn't mind. For a long time, I had told myself a story. That families drift. That distance happens. That love simply changes shape over time. But standing there now, with the truth laid out so plainly, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This wasn't distance. This was design. Careful, deliberate. And strangely, that realization didn't break me. It freed me. I turned slowly and began walking back toward the reception, not hesitating this time, not searching for a place, not waiting to be welcomed. Just walking. The closer I got, the louder everything became again. Music, voices, the soft clinking of glasses. But now, I heard it differently. Before, it had felt like something I was trying to enter, something I was still a part of. Now, it sounded like something I was observing, from the outside. I moved through the crowd with quiet ease. No one stopped me. No one questioned me. And for the first time that evening, I didn't mind. Near the center of the garden, I noticed a small group gathered around Vanessa. She was speaking animatedly, her voice polished, confident, practiced. People listened, nodded, smiled. I slowed just enough to hear. We wanted everything to feel refined, she was saying. Intentional, not cluttered with unnecessary elements. A few people laughed softly, understanding, approving. Unnecessary elements. Such an interesting phrase. My eyes moved briefly to Chloe, standing beside her, beautiful, radiant, and completely at ease in the world Vanessa had created. She didn't look uncomfortable. She didn't look conflicted. She looked aligned. And that, more than anything else, told me everything I needed to know. I didn't stop, didn't interrupt, didn't make my presence known. Instead, I continued walking, past the center, past the lights, toward the long table where the seating arrangements had been displayed. Rows of names, carefully printed, carefully placed. I found mine. Table 17, near the back. Not with family, not with close friends. Just somewhere convenient. I studied it for a moment, then smiled faintly. Of course. Everything had been arranged perfectly, including where I didn't belong. I reached up and lightly touched the name tag pinned to my dress again. Still just my name, Still simple. Still incomplete. But now I understood something I hadn't before. They hadn't just removed me from their world. They had already decided who I was within it. Absent. Irrelevant. Replaceable. I let my hand fall. And in that quiet, steady moment, I made a decision. Not out of anger. Not out of hurt. But out of clarity. If they wanted me to be absent, then I would be.
Completely. No explanations. No confrontation.
No scene. Just absence. But not the kind they expected. The kind they wouldn't understand until it was far too late. The sun had begun to dip lower in the sky when the music shifted. Softer at first, then louder, more deliberate. A man stepped toward the center of the garden, microphone in hand. Well-dressed. Confident. The kind of person hired to guide a perfect evening exactly as planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "May I have your attention, please?" The conversations faded, glasses lowered. All eyes turned toward him. "We'd like to take a moment," he continued, "to recognize the people who made this beautiful celebration possible." A gentle wave of applause moved through the crowd. I stood near the edge of it all, still, quiet, watching. "Of course," he said with a warm smile, "this day would not be what it is without the incredible efforts of the bride's mother." He gestured toward Vanessa. More applause, brighter this time. Vanessa stepped forward gracefully, placing a hand lightly against her chest, as if humbled by the recognition. "We also want to thank the Bennett family," the man continued, "for their support, their vision, and their generosity." More applause. More smiles. My eyes moved to Chloe. She was glowing.
Proud. Happy.
And for a moment, just a brief, fleeting moment, I wondered if she would say something. If she would step forward. If she would correct the silence. She didn't. The man continued, listing names, acknowledging contributions. Each one spoken clearly. Each one met with appreciation. I listened carefully, not because I expected anything, but because I wanted to be certain. And when he finished, when the applause settled, when the moment passed, my name had never been spoken. Not once. Not by accident. Not by oversight. Simply not at all. A strange calm settled over me. Familiar now. Comfortable, even. Around me, people began talking again, returning to their conversations, their laughter, their evening. To them, it had been a lovely speech.
Apropé anouladment.
A perfect moment. To me, it had been confirmation. I reached up slowly and removed the name tag from my dress. The small gold pin slid free easily. The paper felt lighter in my hand than it had before. Margaret Holloway. Just a name. No role. No place. I looked at it for a moment, then folded it once.
Carefully.
Neatly. And slipped it into my clutch. Because I didn't need it anymore. I lifted my gaze back to the reception, to the lights, to the people who had already decided who I was. And for the first time that evening, I allowed myself to smile. Not the polite smile I had worn all day, not the one meant to reassure others. This one was different. Quiet.
Certain.
Because something had shifted. They believed I was still part of this evening, still present, still within their reach. But they were wrong.
They just didn't know it yet.
I turned slightly, my eyes drifting toward the entrance of the estate, toward the long driveway beyond the gates. Everything had been planned so carefully, every detail controlled, every role assigned. Except one.
Mine.
And now, I was finally ready to define it myself. The first note of tension didn't come from the music. It came from the entrance. At first, no one noticed. Why would they? The evening was flowing exactly as planned. Champagne refilled, laughter rising, the bride glowing beneath soft lights. But I noticed, because I was already watching the edges. A black car had pulled up quietly near the main gate, not part of the schedule. not part of the performance. The driver stepped out first. Then another man followed, older, measured, carrying a slim leather folder in one hand. I recognized him immediately. Mr. Harrison. My lawyer. He wasn't dressed for a wedding. Not quite. His suit was darker, simpler, practical. The kind of suit worn by a man who dealt in facts, not appearances. He paused briefly at the entrance, scanning the crowd, looking for someone. Looking for me. I didn't wave. I didn't move toward him. I simply stood where I was and waited. Because timing matters. A few staff members approached him quickly, confusion flickering across their faces. This wasn't part of the plan. You could see it in the way they moved. Polite, but uncertain. There was a brief exchange. Quiet. Controlled. Then something shifted. One of them nodded, stepped aside. And just like that, he was allowed in. The ripple was subtle at first. A glance here. A whisper there. Then Vanessa noticed. I saw it happen. The exact moment her attention broke from the conversation she was leading. The exact moment her expression changed. Confusion. Then irritation. She said something quickly to the group around her and began walking toward him. Fast. Controlled. Chloe followed a step behind. What is this? Vanessa asked as she reached him, her voice low but sharp. This is a private event. Mr. Harrison didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'm aware, he replied calmly. His eyes moved briefly past her.
To me.
Then back. I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Margaret Holloway. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Vanessa's posture stiffened. Just slightly, but enough. There must be some mistake, she said smoothly, recovering quickly. We can discuss whatever this is another time. No, he said. Simple. Final. It can't wait. Now people were noticing. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to feel that something was different. The music softened, not stopped, but quieter, as if the room itself was listening. Chloe stepped forward then, her voice uncertain. Grandma, she said, glancing toward me for the first time that evening. I met her eyes.
Calm.
Unhurried. Yes, dear, I replied. That was all. Mr. Harrison opened the folder.
Carefully.
Deliberately. Earlier today, he began, his voice steady. Certain financial arrangements connected to this event were finalized. Vanessa's smile tightened. I'm sure whatever paperwork you have can be handled later. It concerns the funding of this wedding, he continued. Silence. Real silence this time. Specifically, he said, the fact that the entirety of this event, he paused just long enough, was financed solely by Mrs. Holloway. The word spread.
Slowly.
Then all at once. Conversation stopped. Glasses lowered. Eyes turned. Vanessa didn't speak. Not immediately. Chloe's expression shifted. Confusion. Then something else. Recognition. And as of this afternoon, Mr. Harrison added, Mrs. Holloway has formally withdrawn all remaining financial support connected to future arrangements. Future arrangements.
Honeymoon.
Trust funds. Everything. The air changed. Completely. I could feel it. Not as tension. Not as chaos. But as truth. Unavoidable. Uncomfortable. And finally, visible. I didn't move. Didn't step forward. Didn't explain. Because I didn't need to. For the first time that evening, they were all looking at me. Not as absence. Not as background. But as something they had failed to understand. And something they could no longer ignore. No one spoke at first. Not after the words settled. Not after the truth had been placed, quietly, cleanly, into the center of the room where it could no longer be ignored. Vanessa was the first to move.
Of course she was.
Her smile returned. Carefully. Precisely. The kind of smile built not from warmth but from control. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said, her voice light enough to pass as calm. She turned slightly, addressing the guests as much as the situation. As you all know, planning an event like this involves many contributions. Not this one, Mr. Harrison interrupted.
Still calm.
Still measured, but final. The smile on her face tightened. Just for a second. Chloe looked between them, then at me. Grandma, she began, her voice softer now, uncertain in a way I hadn't heard in years. I didn't step forward. I didn't rescue her from the moment. Because this belonged to her now. I didn't know, she said quickly, almost defensively. Mom handled everything, I thought. Vanessa turned sharply. Chloe. Just her name. But it carried a warning. A line being drawn. The guests were no longer pretending not to notice. Whispers moved through the crowd. Subtle, but growing. The grandmother paid for everything? Then why wasn't she? Did you see her name tag?
So they had seen.
Vanessa exhaled slowly, recalculating. Always recalculating. This isn't the time for confusion, she said, her tone sharpening beneath the surface. We can discuss financial matters privately.
Of course, I said. My voice wasn't loud.
But it carried. Because silence had already prepared the room to listen. Vanessa turned to me, her expression polite, her eyes not. Margaret, she said, choosing the name carefully, I'm sure this can be resolved without creating a scene. A scene. I considered that word for a moment, then nodded slightly. You're right, I said gently. Relief flickered across her face. Brief. Premature. I have no interest in creating a scene. Another pause. But I do have an interest, I continued, in clarity. The words settled differently, heavier. I reached into my clutch, slowly, deliberately, and removed the folded name tag. The same one I had taken earlier. I unfolded it carefully,
smoothed the edges,
then held it up just enough for those closest to see. The absent old lady. No one laughed this time. No one spoke. Because now, it wasn't just a label. It was evidence. Vanessa's composure cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. That she started then stopped. Searching. Reframing. A joke, she said finally. It was meant as a joke. A few people shifted uncomfortably, because everyone in the room understood something she didn't. Jokes require consent. I lowered the card slightly, still holding it. I see, I said. And I did. Chloe stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the words, then on me. I didn't know about this, she said again. Quieter now, less certain. I studied her face, the same face that used to look up at me with flour on her cheeks, the same eyes that once needed my approval. Now searching for something else. Permission. But I didn't give it. Instead, I smiled, not unkindly, but not gently either. I believe you, I said. And that was the truth. Because this moment, this absence, hadn't been created in a single decision. It had been built, slowly, carefully, by both of them. I folded the card again, placed it back into my clutch, and looked around the room one last time. At the guests, at the lights, at the celebration that had almost convinced me I still belonged. Then back at them. Vanessa, still calculating, still trying to regain control. Chloe, still searching, still realizing. And for the first time that evening, they weren't deciding who I was. They were waiting to see who I would choose to be. The silence lingered, not the kind filled with tension, but the kind that comes when something has already ended and everyone is just now realizing it. I looked at Chloe for a moment longer, really looked at her, not as a bride, not as the woman standing in front of me, but as the girl she used to be. Grandma, she said again. This time, her voice was different. Softer. Uncertain. Almost afraid. I could have stepped forward. could have comforted her, could have made this easier. For her. But not for me. So I didn't move. You don't have to say anything, I told her gently. Because she didn't. Not anymore. Everything that needed to be said already had been. Vanessa shifted beside her, her composure still trying to hold. Margaret, let's not turn this into something it isn't, she said, her tone tightening. I turned my gaze to her.
Calm.
Steady. It already is, I replied.
No angit.
No raised voice. Just truth. That was the part she couldn't control. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then I reached for my shawl, adjusting it lightly over my shoulders. A small, ordinary movement, but final. I think I've stayed long enough, I said. A ripple moved through the guests. Not loud, but present. Wait, Chloe stepped forward instinctively. I paused, not turning back completely, just enough. I hope you have a beautiful evening, I said. And I meant it. Because despite everything, this day was still hers. But I was no longer part of it. Not in the way I used to be. Not in the way I had hoped to be. And finally, I accepted that. Chloe's eyes searched mine, looking for something. Forgiveness, reassurance, permission to undo what had already been done. But some things, once seen clearly, cannot be unseen. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I nodded. I know. And I did. Because intentions are rarely the problem. Choices are. I turned then, fully this time. The path leading away from the garden was softly lit. Quiet. Almost untouched. With each step, the music faded behind me. The laughter, the voices, the life I had once believed I was still part of. No one stopped me. Not because they didn't notice, but because they didn't know how. And that was all right. As I reached the entrance, the night air felt cooler, cleaner. Mr. Harrison stood nearby, waiting, as he always did, not intruding, just present. Everything is in order, he said quietly. I know, I replied. He opened the car door for me. I paused for just a second before getting in. Not to look back, but to breathe. To feel the weight of something I had carried for years finally lift. Then I stepped inside. As the car pulled away, the lights of the estate grew smaller in the distance. Still beautiful, still perfect, but no longer mine. I rested my hands in my lap.
Calm. Steady.
They had called me absent. And in the end, they were right. Because I had finally chosen to be not invisible, not forgotten, but free.